Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today I am joined by a rather fascinating guest, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. His name is Paul Walsh, and he is from a company called MetaCert. And we were talking just before this interview, and he was telling me some of his backstory that I think is absolutely amazing. And we're going to dive into a couple of different things here. But Paul, thank you so much for joining me here, on the radio, video, and podcast form.
It's a pleasure, Nick. Thanks, and thanks for such a wonderful introduction as well.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Now, I'd love for my audience to hear some of your backstory and also a little bit about MetaCert what MetaCert does, because I think it's a really fascinating thing.
Backstory: started my tech career at AOL back in the 90s. I was part of the team that helped to launch technologies like AOL Instant Messenger, 56K modem protocol, and a bunch of other cool stuff. Worked in the mobile industry for a while, started my first company in software testing in 2003, was the chairman of the British Interactive Media Association for 3 years when I lived in the UK,
wow.
Where I spent 12 years. During that time, around 2003, 2004 to about 2009, I contributed a lot to W3C. So I was the first person to rewrite Tim Berners Lee's vision of the One Web when I co-founded the Mobile Web Initiative. I'm one of the two people that co-instigated the W3C standard for URL classification in 2004.
Yeah, which and for the record, I don't want to interrupt you. For my non-technical audience, can you explain that just a little bit?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the W3C is the standards body for the World Wide Web, and it creates standards like HTML that most people would be familiar with. And it's responsible for creating other initiatives and standards like the semantic web, which I contributed towards also back in the early days. And when I co-founded the Mobile Web Initiative, the web meant something entirely different during the WAP days. And so we really had to rethink what the web was. And that's why I was tasked with rewriting Tim Berners-Lee's vision of the One Web, because it meant something entirely different. And so helped to found that initiative. That took about 4 years, and we built best practices and standards to help developers build websites that work on small phones. But when the iPhone came out, it kind of made that less useful because it became obvious and easy to see what the web would be on a phone. But in the context of our conversation, I guess the biggest contribution I've had or that I've made to standards is I co-founded the standard for URL classification that went on to replace an old standard called PIX, which is what Microsoft Internet Explorer and Apple parental controls still use in part today. And then more recently, I founded MetaCert, which is a security company that protects people from dangerous links. So my entire career has brought me to where I am today, which is the web, mobile web, and helping to protect people when they open links.
Yeah, and it's pretty fair to say that since AOL and 56K dial-up, basically nothing has changed in technology. So you're just doing the same thing over and over and over for the last 30 years, right?
It's the same thing. And a big part of what I do for a living involves as much about interpreting and foreseeing human behavior around new technologies as it is about the technical side of classification of URLs or the technical side of browser software or team collaboration software like Slack and Skype and so on. So yeah, a lot of it is around the human behavior.
Yeah, well, as it has to be. I mean, and that's something that I talk about a lot in my videos and my radio show, is that at the end of the day, humans are the ones interacting. We're the ones that trust. We're the ones using the technology. And if something's going to get us hacked, it's probably going to be ourselves. So, I think that's a very good point. Now, I want to pivot just a little bit here as well, because you're actually involved in something that I'm involved with as well, and that's the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition. And I think we're doing a lot of great work, and I know my listeners and my viewers have heard me talk about this before, but I'd love to get it from your perspective, just given your your history and coming right off the heels of Tim Berners-Lee, one of the granddaddies of the World Wide Web. I'd like to know from your perspective, what do you think of the Cyber Coalition thus far, the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition, and how we're doing?
I think we're doing a really good job. I think there are two main benefits from the initiative. One is we're all coming together as collaborators. As you know, there's now 3,000 members in this community and growing fast. So by the time you push this content out, it's probably 3,500 or 4,000 people, right?
Yeah.
And we're a mix of professionals. By that, I mean, we're professionals in cybersecurity. We have government agencies. So cybersecurity professionals that belong to companies in the space, in security space, but also brands, right? So we have a lot of brands being represented inside the community. So we have brands, security companies, law enforcement, government agencies, and potential customers. And what we're doing is we're putting together, as you know, a central global repository of URLs that are dangerous and are specific to COVID-19. And so I think that's one major benefit, is coming up with that global feed that other companies can make use of to protect their customers and end users. But also, I think the fact that so many of us from around the world are working on COVID-19 specific cyber attacks and scams should help raise awareness amongst those that don't understand or appreciate the significance. The level of fraud and scams on the web right now that are COVID related, whether it's somebody impersonating the World Health Organization with counterfeit websites, or whether it is, you know, pretending to sell masks or pretending to have free tests. It's absolutely insane. It's exploding right now. And there's no, you know, it doesn't look like it's letting up. It's just getting worse and worse. And unfortunately, as you know, people don't realize the importance of security until it's too late. And so we hope to raise awareness as well as provide the tools.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. And you know, just I remember about a week ago or so, you know, the coalition was having a conversation about this. I believe it was in one of our meetings where somebody had mentioned, and maybe it was even you, I can't remember, that within a 24-hour period they had seen basically 60,000 registrations of coronavirus, COVID-19, something related to that. And within 24 hours, there was another 20,000 on top of that. Now, not all of that is going to be malicious. I mean, obviously there's like government websites and all of that, but you know that there's going to be a huge chunk of that that is going to be malicious, infected, you know, whatever that is. And so I find it very interesting that all this information is being aggregated and then ideally being shared with those that need it the most. I know you're in, if I recall correctly, you're actually in Vancouver, Canada. Is that correct? Right. And so you have an entirely different health system here than we do in the United States, where, you know, you might have seen TV reports where, you know, hospitals are very afraid of running short on masks and everything else. And now we've got fake sites spinning up they may try to order from in desperation. I think that's a huge problem.
Oh, big time. I spent 12 years in the UK, so I've experience with the NHS.
Right.
I spent 7 years in Silicon Valley, so I've got experience with the US healthcare system. And now, I've been in Vancouver, BC for the past year, and so I'm getting to see what it's like here. And it's just a horrible situation. What I just cannot understand, cannot fathom how these bad actors are just going after, we know they go after the most vulnerable. But imagine going after the most vulnerable hospitals at a time like this.
Yeah. And
they're going after them with ransomware attacks. And as we know in the security world, the vast majority of cyber attacks start with phishing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'd like people to get out of this interview, you know, tips that you and I come up with in the conversation and banter. But, you know, if people just remembered one thing, end users just remembered one thing, I would really love it. And that is not to rely on HTTPS or the browser padlock for trust or identity information.
Yes.
So always look to make sure the website has HTTPS, to make sure it's encrypted. Make sure your connection is private. But you know, that could be a private connection to the devil.
Yes.
Because over 93% of all new phishing websites start with HTTPS. So I urge people to not look at that for trust and instead look for other indicators of trust. And I believe, you know, if that's the only thing people walk away with from an end user perspective, I think fewer people will fall for a phishing scam.
Yeah,
because everybody relies on the padlock.
Yes, and I think that's a very, very important point to make. You know, just coming from my side of cybersecurity as well, when we're working with clients, one of those things where we're very easily able to, let's say, download test infections, like 0-day infections, into a network for like a cybersecurity assessment, is when their defensive technology can't actually decrypt that green lock. It can't decrypt SSL or that HTTPS to inspect the traffic. And as we know, there's a lot of cyber criminals, as you said, are going to spin up these websites, enable them with these certificates to have that green lock, to give that people that sense of security. And by virtue of it, you think you're in a safe site in the same way you'd go to your bank. And I think that's a very important point. I mean, I would also add to that I think we need to have some common sense. You know, if somebody is offering you a whole bunch of N95 masks for $1 each or something on their website, it's probably not true. You know, you can find legitimate sources, you know, for a lot of these things, but on top of that, having a good spam filter or a good web filter, I think is really going to help in this situation. But because we've seen this explosion, it's very difficult to trust those things to keep up as quickly as we are seeing new domains identified. And there are a lot of good technologies out there, which is why I think the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition is gathering all of this intelligence to help reinforce all of that in the world.
Yep, as the saying goes, hackers don't break in, they log in.
Yeah.
Because as we know, it's easier to compromise a person. It's easier to compromise the human interaction than it is to try and compromise a computer system. It's more effective, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's easier. And, you know, if there was a couple of other tips I would throw out there very, very quickly, if you don't mind, Nick, it would be, let's not assume anymore. We're living in a new world now. Let's not assume that all phishing emails have bad grammar and typos and bad English. They don't. Especially targeted attacks. And most bulk attacks also. Most bulk scams have very well formatted emails, perfect English, good grammar, good spelling. So don't just look for that. And then also the sender, it's easy to make it look like it comes from a specific brand or a colleague. And then hovering over links also doesn't necessarily work by itself, because the link can redirect many times and you don't get to see where you're actually going to really end up. So don't look at the padlock for trust. Don't assume there's going to be bad spelling mistakes. Hovering over the link doesn't help, and checking the sender doesn't always help either. So it's kind of just, there are little tips to make people a little bit more aware.
Yes, I would completely agree. And you know, the way I look at it is through the 5 laws of cybersecurity, which was kind of something that I enjoyed writing. And that is, if there's a vulnerability, you know, basically, if there's a vulnerability, it will be exploited. Everything is vulnerable in some way. Humans trust even when they shouldn't, which I think is really what you're talking about here. And with innovation comes opportunity for exploitation. So as we develop that innovation, the hackers are going to innovate just alongside with us. And finally, when in doubt, see law number 1. If there's a vulnerability, it's going to be exploited. Use your eyeballs, you know, figure that out. I think it's a very important message. And I just have to say on an aside, and I don't know if this has been your experience as well, but it has been overwhelmingly amazing to see 3,000 plus cybersecurity professionals volunteer their time around the world, you know, to join us, to be that line in the sand, to protect the hospitals and other critical infrastructure from those that would attack us, you know, especially in a time of crisis. There's no honor among thieves, you know.
And not expecting anything in return either. You know, this community is putting in their experience and their expertise, but they're also donating, you know, technology.
Yes.
And then, as you know, we have a lot of companies that are giving us free licenses to be able to use email platforms, hosting providers, website design, threat intelligence systems.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to mention any names in particular because I'll forget about some other people that should be mentioned. But 3,000 people coming together, putting in a lot of time and effort to create this central hub, this central repository, central educational system to combat COVID-19. And this is not even something that we've scheduled for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, have we? I mean, we're looking at least a year's project from here out. So it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon.
Right. And as the world continues to battle this pandemic globally, I mean, we're going to see cyber threat around the globe. And I think that's something that, you know, it's been very heartwarming to see that we can fight back, that these hospitals are not an island unto themselves, that there is support out there, you know, from the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition and our various partners that are supporting us. And with that, unfortunately, we've got to wrap up the time here. But Paul, thank you very much for your time. I think your backstory is absolutely fascinating, and it's been a real pleasure working with you and collaborating with you, as well as it has everybody else, in the coalition. And if people want to learn more about you or follow you or learn more about MetaCert, your company, where can they find you?
MetaCert.com.
MetaCert.com.
One address.
One address. Fair enough. That's easy. And if you want to know more about the cyber threat, the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition, you can find us at cyberthreatcoalition.org, where you can sign up, get our intelligence feeds, especially if you're a hospital or critical infrastructure. And with that, Paul, any last words for us?
Stay safe, stay humble, be compassionate.
There you go. Well, Paul Walsh, again, thank you very much for your time. And everybody, I hope you enjoyed this interview with Paul, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, Nick.